for everyone to take a look at as you're joining in. First and foremost, welcome everyone. I'm sure folks typically on webinars are kind of coming in a little bit here at the start. So I know it doesn't state my name on, thank you for letting me know there, Nicole. Let me see if I can copy and paste this. All right. Is the chat visible for folks now? Someone can give me a yay or nay in the chat. That would be very helpful. All right, awesome. Welcome, welcome, Nicola, South Florida. We did add this webinar rather late to our schedule, so this might be a very small turnout, which in some ways can be great because if there's anything we want to dive a little bit deeper into, we have the opportunity. I'm just going to recap a little bit what's in the chat, and then we're actually going to get going. There's a lot kind of happening for today. First and foremost, this webinar is already being recorded. I will double check to see if you guys will be getting that recording. However, you will definitely be receiving the slides from today. So we'll have some visual support as we kind of explore how somatics and ayahuasca are so symbiotic with one another. There will be an optional Q&A if you guys would like to stay. I really respect everybody's time. We have busy lives, but if you'd like to, an extra 20 minutes will be reserved for any deeper questions we may have. Then again, if we have a small group, we might have some time to process some of these while we're here together. Requests, please just let me know where you're coming in from. It's always so beautiful to connect with different souls around the globe, particularly around our beloved plants. So excited to see who is with us today. And again, anytime you have specific questions that are coming up around the content today, or anything that's relative to somatics and ayahuasca specifically, feel free to put it in the chat, and then that way we can make sure that we come back to that at the end. All right. And Cork, Ireland, lovely, amazing. Oops. And Chesapeake, Virginia. Okay, no worries if you need to kind of jump in and out here. Again, this is a friendly format to absorb what you can. And again, it will be recorded. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and just bring in a little bit of some Palo Santo here and just kind of create a little bit of space for us before we really start exploring how these, I consider sentient beings, right? Our body consciousness and ayahuasca consciousness, they are both these intelligent, very sentient creatures. And so before we really dive into the material, for those of you that might be in a space where this feels available or appropriate, is to just go ahead and begin calling in or bringing some gratitude for the wisdom carriers that allow us to show up and do this work. Thinking of our ancestors, our guides, and the indigenous peoples all around the globe, right? Historically, that have held the wisdom of our bodies. There's nothing new and unique. We're seeing somatics having a renaissance. We're seeing psychedelics having their renaissance. This is ancient wisdom that has been held for us to be able to experience this at this time. So however you would like to call in the people that have allowed you and supported you to be able to find this path and explore this work, if we can just have a brief moment of gratitude, of thank you. Thank you so much for paving the way and carving the space that allows me to be here, experiencing all of this divine work. And sending some love to the wisdom carriers and medicine holders of the Amazonian medicines, all of the peoples that have invited us into this experience. So if you have experience working with Shipibo Kanibo, the Kokama, the Hunikun, the deep forest herself, Mother Vine, Shakruna, thank you, thank you, thank you. It is such an honor to be able to experience the wisdom that you have been holding and caring for us for so long. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share some slides here today. Again, you'll all be receiving these. And please just let me know if you're unable to witness these slides. I'm going to check back in here in the chat. Are the slides visible for everybody when I open that up? And you're free to come off mic as well if that's easier for your location. Amazing. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and go back. Unfortunately, I can't have both going at the same time. Okay. So today we're really going to be talking about, again, the synergy between ayahuasca herself and our body, how these two relate and how we can support the integration of her medicine as well as our own body's medicine. We're going to explore exactly what is somatics. We're going to look at the foundational principles that often are thought to kind of support the base of what somatics is experienced as. We're going to look into why somatics is beneficial and how this is actually showing up in current research. We're going to explore how the body is a bridge to, again, integrate this work with ayahuasca. And we're going to look at this through the lens of how ayahuasca is working through our system, as well as how we process somatically. This is going to go ahead and just reveal how deeply symbiotic, synergistic these two beings are. And we're going to begin to touch into how to create a somatic toolkit that can support you for before, during, or after an ayahuasca experience. So first and foremost, what is somatics? Somatics, I like to think of it as an experiential consciousness, right? Our body is alive. It is its own being. I can have an experience of my body, right? I'm experiencing a sense of alignment in my system. And my body is also having an experience of what that alignment feels like for itself, right? So there's always this interdynamic or relationship of what is my body's experience. So I like to think about this as experiential consciousness. Somatics is also considered a therapeutic field with an emphasis on the internal experience relative also to our external experience, awareness, which we're going to dive into a little bit deeper, and perception, right? A little distinction here. Awareness of what's happening in that internal experience, and the perception might be, what do I make of that experience? What meaning am I placing upon that experience? Now, we might think of the somatics as kind of this new burgeoning field. For some of us, this is seeming like it's kind of coming out of nowhere, right? It's becoming more mainstream. In the West, this became really popularized. It was introduced around 1933, but it became really popularized in like the late 60s and the 70s, which interestingly enough is about the same time psychedelics really had their entrance into the Western world. So where we think we're having this somatic and psychedelic renaissance right now, it's really reflective of what we witnessed with somatics and psychedelics previously in about the 60s and 70s. But the real truth is somatics is nothing new. This is incredibly, incredibly ancient, innate wisdom. We're all born with this experience of ourselves, of being embodied. And how we utilize that wisdom is such as things of these felt sense experiences, intuition, a deep gut knowingness, right? So again, this has been wisdom that has been carried in our bodies through cultures, through all different peoples for thousands of years. There's considered kind of three primary pillars of somatic in terms of the therapeutic field. We have somatic psychology, which is where we're seeing a lot of the movement in terms of practices such as EMDR, somatic experiencing, polyvagal theory, things of these natures, and somatic movement and somatic body work. Now, these aren't the only pillars, but this is what kind of created the crux in the Western world in terms of how somatics has been explored, right? Now, we could think, isn't all movement or all body work somatic in nature? And yes, we could say that, of course, because we are in a body and moving and receiving touch work is inherently somatic. And there is a differentiation considered in the therapeutic field in such that somatic movement or somatic bodywork is inviting intentional cueing. There's an essential inquisition or internal inquiry process that's invited into the exploration of movement or receiving touch work with the intent of having a therapeutic nature, right? So that can look ambiguous in terms of we're not necessarily having an agenda into where that inquisition is leading, right? But there is an intention to bring a sense of curiosity into what our experience is while we're moving or experiencing touch work. So I mentioned before that there is an emphasis in the therapeutic world for somatics on the internal experience and the awareness of this internal experience. And what we're largely referring to is something known as interoception, right? Interoception is what I like to think about is internally sensing, yes? So we can recognize when we're starting to feel hungry or thirsty. Sometimes when we have a really detailed or refined internal sense, we can actually sense our heart rate, right? We often use breath as a very introductory connection to interoception, right? And these interoceptive cells live specifically in our viscera, so our internal organs, our blood vessels, muscles, joints, skin, and the central nervous system. So we have a larger sensory map, so to speak, of some of these cellular tissues in our body in these locations. And it's to inform us of certain needs for survival, right? Such as hunger and thirst. Other senses, however, and we dive into this a little bit into a deeper course, but we often think of our five senses as sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. However, scientists have agreed on at least 9 senses. So equilibrium, our balance, proprioception, our awareness of where we are in space, thermoception, which is our ability to actually sense temperature change within our system, and nociception, right? Nociception is, sorry, there's a little typo there. It's nociception, is our ability to experience sensation that can then be interpreted as pain, right? But the interesting thing here is while there's 9 senses that have been agreed upon in the scientific world, there's actually 33 that are debated. And why this is relevant with somatics is because sensory is the landscape of the language of our body. The sensory nerves are what's informing us of our experience, whether that is internal or, again, our awareness of our environment. How many of us have walked into a room and immediately had a felt sense of like, something's off here, right? I don't know what it is, or maybe I do, but there's a felt sense and knowingness, maybe a gut reaction. And those are different sensory skills, right? So we dive into what these different sensory skills are, again, deeper in the course. But I also want to break out here and just mention that somatics as a field, again, therapeutically, we also invite things such as gesturing, posture, eye movement, breath patterns, right? All of this can actually be informing us of an internal experience. We refer to this as behavior, and you'll kind of see a little bit later on how behavior actually really ties into the somatic experience. All right, I'm going to know just a little bit more, and then I'm just going to pop out and see how everybody's doing in the chat. Again, there's these kind of foundational somatic principles that we see across the board. Now, I mentioned earlier kind of these primary pillars of somatics. I don't want to negate that there aren't other worlds of somatics. We have ecosomatics of, again, being in nature, to connect to nature as a way of informing our internal landscape. Embodied social justice, activism is a very somatic experience, right? And we can use that in terms of facilitating things such as empowered action, right? What's another field that we often see? Relational somatics, right? We're always in relationship. So we can see relational somatics in terms of things that we might explore in terms of co-regulation and partnership, communities, things of that nature, right? So a lot of these different pathways, so to speak, to experiencing somatics have similar philosophies, right? And I would say the cornerstone philosophy that we see across the board is that there is a mind-body connection, that the mind and the body cannot be separate. When we think something of like even cardiovascular, right? In our body, we have a cardiorespiratory. We have a cardiovascular system. We have a respiratory system, but they're not completely independent of one another. They are interdependent in relationship. They coexist. And this is, again, I would say the most foundational principle or philosophy of somatics is that our mind and our body cannot be separated. They are interdependent. They work with each other in creating our human experience. The other one that, again, across the board is that there is a sensory awareness that is happening within our system. If we think of somatics, again, as this experiential consciousness, right? There is something that is always experiencing or sensing and perceiving within our environments, whether that's internal or external, to inform our experience of just being in a human body. Something I refer to, well, it's the law of conservation, right? From physics of energy cannot be destroyed. And essentially, we're talking about bound survival energy in the system, right? Energy, again, can't be created or cannot be destroyed. And so when we're saying this from a somatic lens, what we're referring to is when we experience states of unfortunate trauma, right, or stress, there is certain energies that are necessary to facilitate the responses to those needs. And that energy can become bound or trapped in the system, right? We often say that, trauma lives in the body. What we're really saying is that physiological loops can occur within our system. This conservation of energy exists in the form of neurotransmitters, hormones, muscular tensioning, so nervous system, right? And so this energy is an alive experience within our system, and it cannot be created, it cannot be destroyed. What it actually is, when we refer to it as a release, is a discharge, that energy gets released back into the system. And this is integration, right? Where we freed up this bound energy that's been utilized towards a need in the body that is now freed to come back into the system and utilized in ways that are more serving at a different day and time, right? We also have a pretty foundational somatic principle across the board, is that there is a homeostatic place within our system, right? That we can regulate into a place of balance. It's healthy for us to have the access, the variability to move into different states of experience. However, that we have this ability to regulate back to this homeostatic baseline, right? Regulation can occur across like 3 different spectrums. We can think about of auto regulation, right? Let's just say I had to run up a flight of stairs to try to catch the next train, right? I might access sympathetic arousal energy to make sure that I can get up those flight of stairs. And then once I'm actually on that train, I'm going to auto regulate back to a more homeostatic static state once I'm seated and rested, right? That's an auto regulation. I might not necessarily have to consciously do anything to allow my body to regulate. What we see a lot in somatics currently is the self-regulation aspect, right? Of how we can support our system through different practices to facilitate that regulation. This can be particularly helpful if we are experiencing bound survival energy somewhere within the system. And also we have co-regulation. We are designed to be beings of connection, social creatures. And so we can work with co-regulatory supports as well to facilitate our coming back to this homeostatic baseline. If we think for polyvagal theory, if that's familiar with anyone, what we're talking about in a homeostatic baseline is loosely, we could think of that parasympathetic rest and digest state, right? And it's even a little more nuanced than that, something we refer to as the ventral vagal branch of the parasympathetic state. And the ventral vagal state is where we exist in connection, right? There's an experience of being open and grounded, safe. There's ability to feel present in the current moment. And so ventral vagal really is this homeostatic baseline that we're encouraging or hoping to create more capacity for, whether that's auto, self, or co-regulatory skills. And the last one here is human potential. Somatics ultimately is looking to support the inherent coherence within an individual, whether that's empowerment, agency, again, activism, that we have these abilities to tap into our greatest potential, right? That we can exist in a state that is both with access to deep restorative rest and also that we have the capacity to show up in that fullness, in that agency, in that state of vibrancy and aliveness. Yeah. All right. Again, I'm going to pop out because that's been a lot and it's moving at a quick speed. How is everybody doing with content? Any questions coming up thus far? I'll give us a moment, but if we're good, I'm just going to hop back in. Awesome. Totally understandable, Chrissy. Thank you for just a little bit of feedback there. All right, we're going to dive back in, folks. Oops, did I go too far? No, I went wrong direction. All right, so why somatics, right? Why are we seeing such a large resurgence in our current culture for a body-based therapeutic approach? And these are some of the current research that has come out specifically around a body-based, or what we call bottom-up, right? Our body in terms of how it informs our cognition, our perception. We are noticing that there's increased self-awareness, a deeper understanding specifically of emotions and behaviors, improved emotional regulation, our ability to track and manage stress and anxiety, enhanced resilience, meaning that there's an increased capacity both for stress as well as for safety, right? And control in the sense of that sense of agency, right? Of how we can show up and where we have impact. Improved interpersonal relationships. There's an ability to increase our awareness for working towards conflict resolution, right? We're more adaptive and flexible, also better with boundaries as well. So there's this cleanliness that can start to show up in how we relate dynamically, right? Reduction in somatic symptoms. So physical manifestations of stress or trauma, headaches, chronic pain, digestion, across the board. This has been incredibly impactful from the somatic lens. Reduction of specifically depressive symptoms, so improved mood and energy levels. We'll dive into this a little bit deeper. Reduction in PTSD symptoms, such as intrusive thoughts, hyperarousal, avoidance, trauma integration. This is what I was speaking to earlier, right? And that bound survival energy that can use a lot of resources of hormones, neurotransmitters, nervous system tensioning in the system. When we free up that energy, right? We call it a discharge in somatics. Sometimes it's referred to as a release. But when we free that up, it actually gets renegotiated and integrated back into the system. So this can break up the charge, right? Specifically of traumatic memories and how our body is holding those, experiencing those. Treatment of complex trauma or PTSD is the integration of fragmentation. So when we start to experience levels of disconnection, right, within our experience, somatic therapy is showing to show a great, again, integration of the different parts of ourselves, the different experiences, and bringing more integration or holistic support to the wholeness of a person. Right. And the long-term efficacy, which I think is huge, is that there's sustained therapeutic results, both mentally and physically. So in terms of like backsliding, right, it's similar to our experiences of working with plant medicines, where we notice these really big shifts and big change over periods of time, and it's sustainable. So shy of showing you a bunch of research reports, this is what has been coming out in current day neuroscience. And this is one just really cool reason for why somatics is having such a big boom right now, is because of how far we've come in the world of neuroscience. And again, just a nod, this is what ancient peoples have known for so incredibly long, right? You may have heard the phrase of, if you were a depressed person and you come to a shaman, their first questions are going to be, when did you last dance? When did you last sing? When did you last create? Right? The indigenous peoples are not as familiar with PTSD, CPTSD. These are things that are more associated with the Western culture. And so this, I think, can be one beautiful reason, if we acknowledge, yes, historically, the wisdom carriers that have brought this forward and allowed this to be present in current day, and how we can infuse science to support what these people have known for so long and what is needed, right? I genuinely think the plants have called somatic therapy into this space because we're so in need of this at this time. All right, so founder of Somatic Experiencing, Peter Levine, this is the work that I'm most deeply associated with and trained with, expresses that trauma is what happens when the organism, meaning the body and the psyche, is strained beyond its adaptational capacity to regulate states of arousal. So we talked earlier about this ability to regulate back to homeostasis. When we don't have the supports in place to support that regulation, this is when trauma or our body can become stuck in that bound or looped experience of survival energy, right? Again, neurotransmitters, hormones, all of these just can kind of almost recycle on a loop because the body didn't get the cues it needed to be able to inform it that relatively right now we are safe, right? So this is what somatics is seeking to inform, is to support the places that did not have that opportunity to regulate completely. This is what we call completion, the opportunity to have that experience and come back to that homeostatic ventral vagal baseline and experience a relative safety in the here and now. So this is going a little bit into polyvagal theory, where we have our different expressions of ventral vagal. You see there down at the bottom. This is where we experience social connection. We feel oriented to our internal and external environment. There's a curiosity, openness, a sense of being grounded. And then we can move through these different experiences of flight or fight, which is a sympathetic arousal, where we experience things such as worry, fear, anxiety, or anger, rage, irritation. And if we continue with the sympathetic arousal, right, for an experience where something might be going on for a longer period of time, or it is very overwhelming, our system will continue sympathetically until it basically pulls an emergency brake. And the emergency brake is known as the dorsal vagal, which is the other branch of the parasympathetic nervous system. There's two. It will pull this emergency brake to conserve energy. This is that law of conservation, right? No energy can be created nor destroyed. If I don't have enough resources in my body to be able to facilitate the flood of neurotransmitters or hormones or whatever might be associated for the need of that particular experience, then my body is going to go ahead and say, we don't have the resources, let's pull the brake. And this is where we can start to experience things such as disassociation, numbness, depression, shame, shutdown of these experiences. We go a lot deeper into this in an upcoming course about somatics for plant medicine integration. But this is a gentle kind of introduction into how our body can move from a ventral vagal present connected state if something becomes overwhelming, it could be too much, too quick, too fast. It could also be too little, too late, right? Not enough of, and our body can start to move into this sympathetic arousal of fight, flight, or fight. If that is overwhelming even further to this system, that's when that e-brake comes on and we go into a freeze or potentially even a fold response. Fawn and appease are also two different experiences that can work into this graph, but just not quite enough time to explore that quite yet. All right, so we're talking about like the completion of energy, right? Is if our body has the time, space, a supportive, relatively safe environment for a somatic process that may have been bound survival energy, we may experience some of these discharge experiences. And that may look like shaking or trembling, vibrations, goosebumps. We may become really hot, right? We might start sweating. We might feel really cold in certain places in our body or extremities. There can be really deep breaths, yawning. Sometimes we'll see a completion of a motor muscle response. So it could be like a movement that moves through the system that it had been wanting to enact previously. Completion of a procedural memory. We actually might, again, kind of complete something that had wanted to occur in the procedure of that experience. An organic external orienting to the room. This is actually a sign often of completion, is when we're somatically deep in our experiencing, there is this felt sense of like, oh, I've processed that. And once the processing has occurred, you'll naturally see that the awareness deepens into the here and now. And so people will begin to orient to the room, to other people. They're more available for that co-regulation because the self-regulation allowed them to be more present in the current moment. That's that return to the homeostatic ventral vagal response. So these, again, are some discharge, right? Sometimes people refer to it as a release. Sometimes it's considered a little a misnomer because that energy is not being freed from the body. As much as it can feel liberating and releasing, it's actually freeing up that energy to now be recycled back into the body. So after this completion occurs, you actually have more resources, right? That conservation of energy frees up and allows those resources to be recycled back into your system. All right, so how does this incredible processing of somatics meet and make sense with ayahuasca? You might have already been seeing some similarities of the therapeutic somatic process and how this may relate to experiences you've had with ayahuasca. And they're incredibly synergistic because body and ayahuasca basically speak the same. They speak the same language. Mother ayahuasca communicates in felt sensations. So this interoceptive quality of what we're experiencing inside our internal landscape. We have visual effects, which is, again, a sensory channel we see in somatics. Emotions, we talked a little bit about how procedural memory and things like that can come to the surface, which can invite memory and emotion. Movement and behavior. So I mentioned earlier, behavior being like gestures or posturing. So movement can be another experience of somatics. But this is all things that we would see potentially in different ayahuasca journeys, right? This is all being experienced through, well, partially through our peripheral nervous system, because that is where our sensory nerves are experiencing this, and then it informs this through the central nervous system. So a little recap here is ayahuasca experiences, right? We might not have all of these in a given time in a journey. We might have maybe one or another or a couple. We might have experiences that we're more prone to, that are more available or familiar in our body. And it's totally normal. It's completely okay. We might not have all of these expressions, right, in our system. But again, collectively, there's often, experiences of visuals, of images that are happening. Again, sensory system, sensation. Again, noticing that knot that's beginning to form in your stomach, right? We also might, again, experience where we start sweating, we start getting really hot, we get really cold, both sensation to an extent, but also purge or a discharge, right? Again, things we've witnessed in the somatic realm. We can also purge and discharge through seeing a whole bunch of images, right? Like it's like a mental clearing that is happening. We obviously have our, we'll call our top and our bottom purges, right? Crying, laughter, so many different ways that our body can be expressing itself in the context of working with ayahuasca. We commonly can emotionally process. We'll go back to certain experiences to digest and metabolize what has occurred in these spaces and maybe have a greater emotional felt sense of what may have existed in these places. Same with memory processing, where we can kind of recall certain memories and digest it in a different way. Unity consciousness, right? This is often where we experience, we can still experience ourself as an individual, and there is that something that is greater, that we are all one. We are divine love in a body, right? So this unity consciousness is this, that things cannot be separate. And this reminds me of the mind-body connection, right? Yes, we can experience them in individuality, individuation, and they're completely interdependent, right? They're there's no ability to be able to separate those completely. So again, we're seeing this unity consciousness, this lack of separation, both in ayahuasca that we see in somatics. All right, so again, shy of showing you a bunch of research. These are some of the benefits of ayahuasca that is shown today. This is a very similar list as our previous. Again, you guys will have this slide deck, so you'll be able to see these a little bit more side to side. The first two are the exact same thing from somatics. Number 3, we have cognitive flexibility. So we can increase our problem solving. We have a reduction of rigid thinking, right? We're a little bit more open or flexible to potentialities. We saw the same with improved interpersonal relationships. In ayahuasca, we also have a reduction in inflammation, chronic inflammation, and neuropathies, similar to somatics, where you have a reduction in somatic symptoms, physical manifestations of stress or trauma. Stress or trauma often inflict inflammation upon the body. Neuropathies meaning nerve-specific pathologies, right? We also see a reduction of depressive symptoms. So similar, we saw this in somatics, we see this in ayahuasca. Reduction in PTSD symptoms, same across the board here. Ayahuasca is also shown to be very beneficial for addiction treatment. It alters the reward and compulsion pathways. So this is working with our dopamine. There's also neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, meaning that there's a growth of new neurons and reorganization. This actually, a neuroplasticity also exists with somatics. And ayahuasca is actually showing to be very promising potential treatment for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. You think of Parkinson's like the motor movement skills, right? This is kind of that behavior pattern, the completion cycle that we might see within somatics. So a lot of similarities or crossover. Both somatics and ayahuasca are working with our neurotransmitters. So serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine is all being regulated within our system. So we often kind of think of serotonin as being the mood regulation. Dopamine is our motivation center. Norepinephrine is actually related to our fight and flight response. All of these have much deeper relationship with how they express. We'll go a little bit deeper into serotonin here. Serotonin also affects our social behavior. It increases our sense of empathy and bonding. It also helps impulse control and aggression. It facilitates pain perception and modulation. Interestingly, serotonin regulates nausea, peristalsis. So those experiences that we're having when we're working with the medicine, right, relative to, again, feeling our gut. And dopamine. Dopamine, we can often think of the reward system, but also, again, works with motivation. So drive, our passion, right, our heart space. Movement and motor control, it helps with tremors, stiffness, difficulty of movement. This is where Parkinson's can also come into play. And it's also associated with attention and alertness for ADHD, but also social bonding and empathy. Norepinephrine is also mood regulatory, pain perception, motivation, attention and focus. But the big ones here are, again, is it's a part of the response system to fight and flight, and it assists breaking down glycogen into glucose to create energy, right? So energy mobilization. This can actually start to facilitate us to have more of a sympathetic response. Let's just say hypothetically, we've been experiencing our somatic self in more of a fold or a freeze state, where we are in that state of hopelessness or shutdown or shame. This can actually start to free up and mobilize some of that energy. Norepinephrine also helps with memory formation. So long-term memory consolidation, particularly emotional or stressful memories. So this is where we actually start to go into this trauma renegotiation, where we can work through previous experiences to start to find this place of resolve or completion. The default mode network is actually being dampened, specifically with ayahuasca, but it is impacted with somatics. And this is where we have our self-identity, right? Self-referential thinking in terms of our thoughts about ourselves. So when this is dampened, things such as shame, right, might be less resistant, right? It also is working with autobiographical memory, so the past of things that we've experienced, right? So we can start to move through and process some of these previous experiences in a way where we can kind of begin to rewrite the story, right? We can see the from a greater sense of gratitude in a way. Yeah. Oh, and increases neuroplasticity. So both somatics and ayahuasca help the formation of new neural pathways, right? For anybody that's ADHD like I am, this is incredibly helpful because it helps to bridge direct connections and start to eliminate the noise, so to speak, of having too many things kind of firing off at once. And so it can bring a great sense of organization to the system. All right, we're coming up here, wrapping up to a close where I'm a little bit over time, just going to acknowledge. These are some of the brain regions that are affected. I'll ensure that I include the slides, you guys, so that you can see deeper nuances of, again, all the neurotransmitters, all these places in the brain, how they relate to our experiences in terms of emotional processing, all of these things. But I do want to touch into the somatics. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. This one is worth noting. The insular cortex, which is part of our brain, is where we actually receive sensory information specifically from gustatory being our taste, right, through our tongue or throat, olfactory, smell. If you've ever had an experience where you're on ayahuasca and somebody's come over and they've blown tobacco, give you a soplada, or aqua florida, and how that can dramatically change your experience while under the medicine. This is, again, the sense of smell that is working directly with how we're processing our sensory experience. Visceral, meaning our internal organs, right? The insular cortex integrates experiences related to emotional processing, our self-awareness and ego, and it dampens that default mode network to facilitate and allow us to tap more deeply into unity consciousness, right? So the insular cortex, there's a lot of science that's coming out around this right now, and it is deeply involved in interoception, our ability to internally sense, and also our sense of consciousness. Just a deeper view there. All right, so how do we support the mind-body with a reciprocity relationship with ayahuasca, right? And we can create coherence by listening to our body's voice, by listening to these different sensory channels as we witness the way ayahuasca is moving through our system, the way it discharges in our system, the way it works with emotions and memories to create that discharge of bound survival energy is synonymous with the way somatics is working. I often like to think of somatics as the non-psychedelic microdose of ayahuasca, right? So we can continue working with our medicinal experiences of ayahuasca and support the integration of what we've discovered in those spaces by microdosing somatics, getting closer to our body and our experience of our body. This is from somatic experiencing. There's, again, a lot of different somatic perspectives out there. All have their own take and for great reason. This particular one is looking at it from what we call somatic channels. So we have behavior, which I mentioned before, is similar to like movement, gestures, posturing, our breath patterning, our facial expressions. These are all ways that our body is expressing itself. We have emotion, right? So any of our classic emotions and all the spectrum of nuance underneath. The sensation channel. We often think of somatics as a felt experience internally, right? That I'm having a specific sensation. Yes, that is true. And there's also these other factors that get to inform this as well. If any of you have ever had an experience where maybe you're doing a body scan or you're in meditation and you actually get visual representation, you get an image. That image could be like transposed on your body, right? You might see a beautiful shape or a beautiful color. It could also be projected onto the screens of your eyelids. This is image. These are all ways that your body is communicating to you. We also actually include meaning making into the experience, right? This is our perception. This is our how we're interpreting the information that is coming in from our sensory cells, sensory experience, and how we're processing this. And meaning making gets a seat at the table as well. So all of these get to inform how we are somatically experiencing ourselves. And I like to even think with these 33 senses being debated currently in science, that we have many, many more, right? These are just some very classic, common ways that we will see the somatic body sharing its narrative, sharing its consciousness, sharing its experience. Some of us might have more access to these channels than others. That's very normal, very okay. And some certain channels might just be easier than others as well. That's also very normal. So when we're building a somatic toolkit, we first and foremost want to get curious about what our needs are. right? And I'm going to break this down even a little bit further. What are my needs going into a ceremony? What are my needs while I'm in ceremony? And what are my needs out after ceremony? And if I can start to get clear on what those needs might be, then I can start to get curious about what kind of somatic support I might need. Let's just say before going into ceremony, I experienced some sense of anxiety, right? I might really respond. I might really need some grounding, right? And maybe something that's grounding for me is being in nature. Maybe it's co-regulation, being with my pet or partner, right? So I can get curious about what is happening in my system. What am I experiencing before, during, and after? And what might my system need, right? Goals can be included in this as well. Needs, I think, sometimes is a little bit more paramount, but all can be considered. We're going to explore variety. The big thing in somatics, I think, in the mainstream is that there's a particular exercise to do for X, Y, or Z. And the reality is, it's what is meaningful for your body. What makes sense, what feels right for your system. So variety is welcomed, right? What is grounding for one person might not be grounding for another person. What is soothing or comforting, again, is not across the board. So we get to explore what that looks like for us as an individual. This is inherently supporting the innate wisdom of your system, right? Not necessarily copying and pasting what somebody else is prescribing for us, because there is no prescription. Again, this is ancient wisdom and it lives inside of you already. And lastly, here is we get to develop what this somatic practice looks like with our toolkit. Do we have common go-tos that we will resource that help us feel a particular way? And maybe at certain times, right? Maybe in my integration journey after I've come back from an ayahuasca experience, I might want to have a few prompts that are already kind of known, that are in my back pocket. Some of you may already have those, where you're like, I know I'm gonna, maybe it's, let's just even, I know we're talking about ayahuasca, but you can say like combo, right? Of going home and taking a shower immediately after to wash off and continue that cleanse kind of procedure, right? Maybe you immediately go out into nature when you get back to your environment. Maybe journaling or working with hape, whatever your go-tos are, but clarifying what they are so that you know, hey, when I'm feeling a particular way, when I am experiencing a sense of dysregulation, maybe there's too much, too quick, too fast, or not enough, too little, too late, then I know what I can go ahead and resource as my kind of immediate supports to help me to that regulatory baseline, right? And you can create what I call checkpoints. So that might be throughout your day where first thing in the morning, I'm going to have, a cup of water, and I'm just going to sit and check in with my body. How are you doing today? Right? I know people that have checkpoints that while they're doing the dishes, right? It could be while you're taking a shower. It could be when you first come home from work before you, cook dinner or put on Netflix. You have a brief moment. Whatever those checkpoints look like for you, they get to be unique to your actual life. So we kind of talked about this a little bit already, before, during, after. Again, exploring how would you ideally like to feel entering ceremony? What somatic supports would allow that to occur, right? Do I need a sense of grounding? Do I need a sense of connection? Do I need a sense of soothing or comfort? During, what do you need to support your optimal ceremonial experience? Same questions, right? Grounding, breath, sense of support, right? Whatever these look like that you might need in that particular moment. And same with after, right? Do I need time to be with myself to self-regulate? Do I want that co-regulation? and what practices can I offer my body to allow that. And we're always looking for what is that felt sense of the ventral vagal, right? That's that homeostatic baseline of grounded, connected, open, curious. What's going to help to bring me to that state? It's not to not experience what you are experiencing. It's not to bypass it or override it. It's to support your system into the direction of regulation. All right, briefly, again, you guys will get this, but practice. So you get to use your checklist, your go-tos, your checkpoints. If you, again, start to have a contemplation of what this could look like, right? Adapt. You get to attune to the moment, bring curiosity, variability, and variety is exactly what we might need at given times. So even though we have our go-tos, if they're not quite hitting the spot, then we just get to get curious, right? That's not that tool doesn't work anymore, it just might not work in that exact moment. And support, right? Sometimes, again, communal support, being able to connect in integration circles. PMP offers those a couple times a month, actually. Or you might have community where you live, right? It could be at your local studios, yoga studio, sister circles, things of that nature, and leaning into professional support if needed. Okay, I've gone a minute over and I talked really fast. So thank you for all of your time here. And again, you'll get all the slides. I'll include some more nuances of different experiences in terms of how these different brain regions, neurotransmitters, things like that express themselves. Because sometimes it can kind of help pinpoint a little bit of how something's supporting your system. Thank you so much, Chrissy. Love it. I'm going to go ahead and drop into the chat here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. If you need to take off, I fully respect. We all have busy lives and things going on, but thank you again for your presence. All right, Chrissy, I'm going to read yours here. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I hope you were beautifully supported in that experience, especially being your first ceremony. And not being familiar with somatic responses. And that's, I'm loving that you've had different ways of connecting both with the plants and somatics. I dive deeply into ayahuasca here. It's the one I'm the most familiar with in terms of experience. And all of these plants have their own ways of communicating with our body somatically. It's a symbiotic, synergistic, earth is earth, right? And our body is earth. Wonderful. Thank you, Alex, as well. Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, Nicola. I will send the slides. If you guys have any questions, you will have my email. So feel free. You can just respond directly to email there. And I'll double check as well, just to see if you guys will also get the recording of this webinar. I don't see why you wouldn't, but I will make sure to respond to all of that. Let's just see. Yeah. I hear you, Chrissy, and I'm sorry that that wasn't your experience, and how beautiful that you're receiving it in that way to advocate for safety and guidance. I think sometimes, unfortunately, it's kind of how a lot of us come to experience and find this work. And when we can see the gratitude and the heartfelt message that works through us in these experiences, totally going into somatic speak here, but that's the human potential, right? Where we can shift those experiences into our human potential of empowerment and heart-led activism or heart-led action agency. So thank you for showing up and offering that back to the whole. Yeah, I think oh, lovely. Yay. Well, I will see you, I'm sure, later in the PMI course, because I will be offering the somatics for you guys in that. Yeah, it's just more divine souls coming in, showing up, doing this work. The more we are embodied, it's a deep reverence, not only to the paths that we've walked and how much we've endured and experienced, but it's a great honor to the plants themselves to integrate that experience, to integrate that knowledge so deeply in ourselves, in our being, that we show up in that ripple effect outward, right? So for me, it's just a joy to be able to connect with others that are called to integrate their plant-based experiences through somatics. I mean, there's so many beautiful ways, and yeah, it's deeply powerful. All right, okay, I'll see you next Wednesday, Chrissy. And thank you all again. If there's no further questions, I just want to respect everybody's time. I know you guys got things going on between work and driving. So any final last requests, questions, curiosities? And you can feel free to come off mic if you'd like to as well. That's always an option. All right. Thank you all so deeply. Look forward to the email. And again, reach out if you need to. Okay.